Thank you very much for the people who have come along this afternoon. We've got a really exciting session for you today. Anyone that doesn't know who I am, I'm Patricia Keating, and I'm the Programme Lead for Tech Manchester. It's a fully funded initiative supported by UK Fast to help early stage companies across Manchester develop their businesses. Today's about GDPR. We're probably tired of listening about it, but the reason we wanted to put this workshop together was as startups, we don't have lovely, fancy, all-inclusive CRM systems. We're using Dropbox, we're using Eventbrite, we're using SurveyMonkey to gather our data and do our business in a seamless way for the customers. But it means that we have data in all these different platforms and we are still responsible for it. And those things can impact all of us. It can happen even to people like me, where you fall foul of GDPR and data protection rules. The reason that this is so important is because I made that mistake last week, which actually you would have all received an email as a result of it, and I just need to apologise for that. Our organisation has a number of different businesses within it, and Business Cloud magazine is one of those. They were hosting a GDPR event later this week, and we felt that that would be of interest to the people that were attending this event, so we thought we would share that information so that they could send you information on it. Whilst there was a legitimate interest, what we later learned is that actually that wasn't the right approach, and that information was handed over manually and has since been destroyed. And so we wanted to apologise to you today. But the point is, it can happen to anyone. It happened to me, and it can happen to you. So that's why we've put together a really extremely great team. We have Paul Mason from Sakarma, who is over here. And Paul, claim to fame, I believe, is that his mind is classed as a weapon, I believe, according to technically classed as a weapon when it comes to cyber. So he has a lot of knowledge to share with you today. And then our own GDPR legend for UK Fast, Stephen Crowe, who's going to take you through the first part of this workshop. So with no further ado, over to Stephen.
Hello. Move this. So by now, I think most people have heard about what GDPR is. It's not working. There we go. So yeah, I'm just going to give you a basic overview of what GDPR is, if you've not heard of it already, as most people have, hopefully. And then we're going to go on to some implementation and considerations of the regulation and what I've been working on for the past 2 years with a lot of our clients and the areas that most people have concern over. And then go through some of those in some more detail, so what you need to do if you're a data processor, how you map out your data, privacy policies, impact assessments, data processing agreements, third-party suppliers, GDPR, cybersecurity and breaches and notifications. So most people already know what the GDPR is. It's General Data Protection Regulation, and it's legislation from the EU that we have to abide by. And it's come about basically because the last update we've had for anything data protection-wise was in 1998, which is the Data Protection Bill. And obviously the internet and technology has changed a lot since then, and the way people use and handle data is obviously massively different. So this has come about to bring some update to that, and it's changing the way that people have to handle data, and it gives a lot more power and control over your own data as a data subject. So it's pretty much a good thing. So in 2017, 46% of businesses experienced a data breach. Now this can be down to their own negligence or just because they're unaware, but what happens obviously when you have a data breach is that you're going to get damaged reputationally, as people find out that you've had a data breach and they might not want to use you as a company, and it also can affect you financially. So there's fines that the ICO, which is our Information Commissioner's Office, can enforce on you. Under GDPR, they're up to under the Data Protection Act, they're only up to £500,000, whereas under GDPR it changes to up to 20 million or 4% of your global turnover. So that's where it's massively different in that regard. And this is why it's been brought about. So you may have noticed that, you know, when you sign up for a service or a business, you use your email address, and then you sort of all of a sudden start receiving emails from different companies you might not have ever been interested in, because people have been, you know, passing your data on to different companies without your knowledge. So this is one of the things that it's aiming to change. It's to improve your rights to know that if you're inputting your data into one website or one business, that is only going to be that business using it. They're not going to sell it to a different company without your knowledge in the first place. And it's still okay to do that, but you have to have the consent of the data subject. So yeah, why now? We just obviously talked about over the past 20 years, things have changed a lot, and this is why it's changing now. It's basically been enforced. It's enforceable from the 25th of May, but it's been about for the past 2 years since the regulation has been released. But it's only comes into enforce on the 25th of May this year. So people have had enough time to abide by it who are current businesses. But obviously as startups, you're hitting it at the best time, because it's a lot harder to try and reverse engineer this than it is to do it from scratch. So under GDPR, and we're going to talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute, you'll be defined as either one of two categories or maybe both. So you're either data controller, which is, as a business owner, you're a data controller because you decide what information you're collecting on people and what it's going to be used for. And you will also be potentially a data processor in the services you offer to people. So for example, UK Fast is a hosting provider. We provide people with servers and platforms to host their businesses on, but we don't control what people do with that. We're just a third-party processor that people use. So the e-commerce business or HR company or marketing company are the data controller, because they're deciding what the purpose of that data is going to be used for. Yeah. So we'll go into a bit more detail in a few more slides' time. It's just very high level. So to obviously abide by the regulation, you need to know how it applies to you as a business and the information you're processing. So the definition that they give for personal data is any information relating to an identifiable person who can be directly or indirectly identified, in particular by reference to an identifier. So that's as complicated as you can get, but it's basically anything you can think of that will identify a person. So, you know, their names, so that's first name, last name, IP address, phone number, any location data, so if they've got like tracking services on any applications you're using, medical health background data, health data, national insurance numbers, a myriad of things like that. So if you can use that data to work out who somebody is, then, yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's everything like that. So for things like that, that's unavoidable for the service you're providing people, and they can't. You're absolutely fine to obviously have that data and collect it, because for a large part of those elements, it's not something you're not using that information for anything else apart from providing them with a service. So it's not that you're taking that information and then using it for a different purpose. So obviously, all like websites will generate a lot of log data. Mm-hmm.
So would we then not be seen because our sites are collecting something which they argue can trace back to a person, even though we can't see it's Joe Black from
But so that's fine to that's fine to use. It's the definition when it comes to personal data and how you use it. So if you're collecting all those logs and they have people's identifiable information in it, and then you're using that information for another purpose, other than just using it for analytics and saying, well, we had 100 visitors from this country and we had 100 visitors from this country at this time of day. that's fine for that because you're not using it. It's when you take that information and say, well, Joe Bloggs visited our website from this IP address on this date, so I'm going to then use that information to, I don't know, send him direct emails and sell it to a different company and say that this visitor used this site on this date. So, yeah, massively. Which shouldn't do. Which you shouldn't be doing unless you're stating it to people as part of the, like, in your privacy policy. No. Yeah, that's, you can't stop, there's no way really if you stop, and it'd be completely useless to try and stop collecting that information. But then, as Paul's going to talk about, obviously, you have a responsibility to ensure that all that information is secure on your server, and you're not like, you've got the correct defenses in place to ensure that if you did have a data breach, that somebody's not going to then take that information and say, well, I don't know what you'd be doing as a business, but if there's something that would be risky of nature, you could say, well, these 5 individuals have bought something from your site, and that's when it becomes damaging to people. But it's as part of the technology you're using, it's unavoidable. That's not personally identifiable because you're not.
Do we have to write into the privacy policy then that we do use the information on our site for this?
So that for the analytics, that's under. You should have like a cookie policy, which you can do that. You include this under. This is also covered under another directive, which is the Privacy Directive, EU Privacy Directive, which is another thing that's coming out at the same time. But for analytical data and cookies, etc., if you should have a policy already, really. I know that's enforceable, I think, 2 years ago as well, which states what you're using and what data it's collecting in terms of analytics. But yeah, it's okay. So. We spoke about, obviously, the difference in fines now. It's gone up, it's changed massively from £500,000, it's gone up to 20 million or 4% of your global annual turnover. This is for things of a data breach that, if you're doing some large-scale processing on people and you're not putting the correct defenses in place and you're using weak usernames and passwords and you just have everything open to the world and somebody gets in and steals your database, like that was the Equifax thing that happened. This is the sort of level of fine you're going to see, so it's 20 million or 4% of your global turnover, whichever's higher. The second tier is a bit lower, so this is for data breaches and also to do with complaints. So if you're not handling people's data in the correct manner in terms of when you send them emails, so one thing we'll talk about later is consent and how you're supposed to contact people in the future. The lesser fine is for if you have a register of complaints and people have, say, for example, asked not to be contacted by you in the future, and you just keep sending them blanket emails and or sell their data to somebody else and they didn't want to have it. That's what the secondary fine is for. So it's quite serious because it can put a lot of people out of business. So here's a list of things that we can talk about in more detail, but as of the 25th of May, here's a list of things you need to do. So you need to maintain detailed records of your processing operations and activities. So that's what you're using data for, where it's going, who has access to it, where it's stored geographically and logically. Implement appropriate security standards, so you should have some policies and procedures in place into like an information security management system. Basically, it outlines to your users what they should be doing, so a general information security policy, acceptable usage of your systems policy, various things like this, which will help you as an employer cover yourself to ensure that your staff are doing the correct thing. Carry out routine data protection impact assessments or privacy impact assessments for high-risk projects. So if you're starting new projects that will potentially have collecting data on people that might be classed as sensitive or high risk, or such a large amount of data that if you were to lose it or it was to go awry somewhere, that it would damage the individuals, you should be carrying out these impact assessments. This one is not a mandatory one, but you should appoint a data protection officer if the type of processing you're doing is surrounded around large-scale processing. So that's if you're doing a lot of systematic processing on people, it goes into the millions of logs and records. And that's things like where people are all the time. If it's processing sensitive data, about them, like mental health data, medical histories, other things of that nature. If you're doing that sort of processing and controlling, you should appoint a data protection officer who will control be responsible, for all of your data protection in your company. This isn't a mandatory job to have in-house. A lot of people are outsourcing this to a third party who do 1 day a month, because it's quite a strenuous thing to employ somebody to do this full time. The ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, have a lot of guidance on what this is as a job role and when you need one, so it's always best to check with them. They have a hotline you can ring if you're unsure about if you need one or not, and it'd be good to speak to them directly, because as much guidance we can give, it's up to them at the end of the day. And if you get confirmation from them you don't need one, then if anything ever goes wrong, you'll obviously have that record that they've told you that you didn't need one. And comply with rules on international data transfers and cooperate with national supervisory authorities. So if you're, for example, using systems that are not hosted within the UK or the EU, which we'll talk about more in some data mapping exercises with Paul, you need to be ensured that the company who's hosting your data outside of the control of the ICO or any of the EU governing bodies, you need to make sure you have the correct agreements in place to ensure that that they're controlling your data in the correct manner and they've got the correct safeguards in place, and they're not just storing it somewhere with no security at all. So if you're using companies outside their control, these are things you need to have in place. And the other big area of it is consent. So for a large amount of the data that people are storing and contacting individuals with, you can't just have it anymore. You need to have a real reason to store it and use it. And one of the biggest ways to do this is consent. So for any marketing information you provide to people, you need to have a valid form of consent to do that. So you can no longer have free check boxes, and you can't just bundle it all into one with the privacy policy. You have to have separate boxes which say, I'm going to be using this data to contact you about this subject for this period of time, for this campaign, and these are going to be the people who have access to it. So I've got some examples we'll go through later as well. And these are just some things, again, we'll go through in more detail now. So, mentioned briefly before the differences between data control and a data processor. So as a data controller, you are responsible for what data is being collected, what the data is being used for, and how long it should be kept for. So you can no longer just store data forever, and you shouldn't do anyway, because if you're storing 20 years of data and you're only using 2, then you've got an extra 18 years worth of data that if you did have a data breach, it's obviously going to all get leaked or lost, and it's going to be a lot more damaging to your company, whereas if you just kept a small subset. And as I said, the best example we always use is, say, an e-commerce business. So you could be selling umbrellas or something, or shoes, and you'll have the ability in-house, to do. You might have the ability to provide your own website. You might even have your own server in your own office, but you might not have your own delivery company, for example. So to get your product to the end customer, you have to use a third party, which is a data processor. So they don't have any control over what the data is, and they won't manipulate it, but they need to have access to it to provide the service that you're offering to your customers. So you'll have to have a company like DHL or UPS who you then pass the customer's personal data to make sure that the product can get to them. So they obviously have responsibility for that data through that time, that point in its life cycle. So you need to have a contract in place with them to make sure that they're storing the data all in the correct manners. And they can provide services such as collecting and storage of data, data transmitting, data recording, and making sure that data is available. So again, another example is us as a hosting company. We can offer hosting products to make sure that the data is always online and it's stored in a secure way. So once you've decided or worked out who's responsible for the data and what category you fall into, these are some things you should have in place as a data controller. So you need a privacy policy, you need to do data mapping, and you need to make sure you have data processing agreements and recording of processing activities in place with your data processors that you're using. So has anyone ever read a privacy policy online? Paul. This is what Twitter's looks like, or pre-GDPR one, and it's extremely long and unreadable. And you can't expect everyone to do this. I think the statistic is if you expected everybody to read all the privacy policies online, it would take them 244 hours each year for each of the services they use. So it's a bit relentless. So what you want to do is make sure that when you do a privacy policy, it doesn't look like this. And there's some guidance on the ICO as well, but these are things that make it a lot easier to read. So you really want it to be about a page long on like a web page. You obviously have it scrolling, but it needs to be simple to read. It needs to be concise and transparent, so you don't use complicated text in it, or you should be doing stating to the user like what you're using the data for, where it's going to be stored, etc. It needs to be easily accessible, so a lot of people keep these in their email signatures as well as a link at the bottom of their website. It's quite obvious where they are these days, I think. And it needs to be written in a clear and plain language, particularly if relating to a child. So for services like Facebook, Twitter, and anyone that has a child register under GDPR, a child can be classed as somebody from age 13, as low as, you can decide where it's between the ages of 13 and 16, under GDPR. So obviously a lot of people aim for 16 because it's a lot easier in terms of producing content that's easier to read by a 16-year-old. But yeah, for example, one of our clients, they provide like key stage 3 services and revision material to children from school. So within their privacy policy, they obviously have to have terms that a child can read and understand of what their data is being used for and who has access to it. And these are some headings that we expect like a privacy policy tell you. So you can have a heading, each of these headings, and then a short paragraph underneath them. So you want to state what information is being collected, so whether that's names, addresses, email addresses, IP addresses, etc. Who is collecting it? So obviously it would be your company, but if you're using, I don't know, if you're quite diverse in nature and you have different wings within different countries, this is where you need to state this. How is it collected? So if you're doing it with order forms, or you're doing events such as this where you'd have physical paper where people sign up to things or give a business card over, or if you're doing it over the phone where calls will be recorded. However, whatever method you're using to collect data. And why it's being collected, so what's the reasons for you keeping that information for however long, whether it's to market to or to provide services to, such as how will it be used. So if you're using it, again, for a data process to send them your customer's address so you can get a product to them, that's how you'd be used. And how it will be shared and who will have access to it. So you can here list if you are going to use a third-party marketing company, for example, or if you're sending it to different companies. When we have people who come for jobs here, we have a different company called MySort. So if someone's unsuccessful here, they'll pass the failed applicants' information onto them to say, well, we haven't got a job with us, but we'll give it to this third-party recruitment company. So that's something that we have to state in all of our privacy policies to anyone who applies for a job. So that's an example of that. And how the data subject will be affected. So if you're processing and storing information on people that could be classed as sensitive, and there was any chance that would get into the wrong hands, or if it was going to affect them in a different way, you'd have to state it here. An example of this is we have, again, a client that does a lot of marshalling for events. So they have to collect and store people's background information in terms of criminal convictions, if they've had anything in the past life that might not make them a good marshal at an event. So this is where they have to state something like that, say, oh, this is the information we collect on you, and if, it could be seen as damaging that way. So that's just an example of, from the ICO, what a good privacy policy looks like and how short it is. And within this, I forgot to mention as well, you should have some form of contact that will be a point of contact for all of your subjects. If they have any concerns around data protection, they can contact that email address with any concerns, say that they don't want their data to be processed anymore, or they think that it's been used in a way that they didn't sign up to. So we have dpo@ukfast.co.uk, so just data protection at ukfast.uk, but it can be anything like that, and it's just a point of contact that they can easily go to raise any concerns or complaints. Right, there you go, Paul.
Can I take this off? Yeah, too scared. It broke the last time I took it off. Right, good afternoon. Okay, so Trish likes making my life hard. And rather than just making us stand up and do 3 hours of talking about GDPR, she insisted this was going to be practical. So we've got 4 practical exercises for you. I see some of you already had a look at them. And basically, they're going to take you through everything that we've just spoken about. So you will walk away with this with a little taste of how to do it and how to look at it. Nobody's ever read a privacy policy, yeah? Okay, that's going to change right now. Hey, practical exercise. Woot. So, here's what you're going to do. Everyone got a phone or a device or something with them? Okay, you've got a choice. Put your hand up if recently your email has been flooded with, "We have changed our privacy policy." Okay, so choice number one, go to your email, find one of those emails, visit the privacy policy, and go through the questions. Choice number two, who uses something like Dropbox, Gmail, Wix, Amazon, some kind of third-party supplier that's the data processor for you? Okay, some of you do. Go find that one and read the privacy policy. Fine. Right. Stephen gives me all the exciting stuff to do. Right. You need a record of data processing activities. So we need to think about what data we are collecting. Now, we've already figured out IP addresses. That was interesting that you said that. That scares me, because I get a lot of people come up to me and go, "Well, my website doesn't do anything." You're like, no, your website collects IP addresses. The internet is not magic. It's not unicorns. It works on IP addresses. You're collecting IP addresses. Do I need to store all of the data? Do you need to store all the IP addresses? You could just delete the logs at the end of the day, couldn't you? You employ a very technical person like Stephen and I, and we come along and do it for you. Or you say, I mean, who did you say you were using for the website? Right, okay, so they will be collecting it. I mean, we'll get onto this later when we look at risk, but you can just accept the risk because you're in the same pot of risk as everybody that's at your level. But you've got to explicitly say you've accepted it just in case that data gets lost. It lives up in the cloud where nobody knows where it is. All right, so cool. This is why I'm not a salesman for UK Fast. We're different companies. This is why UK Fast is good, because we will know it's hosted in the cloud, but on UK Fast cloud servers based in the UK. So we're good. And we might be able to sort out your logs and stuff like that for you if it's a dedicated server. So these things are possible, is what I'm saying. How long are you storing it for? And can I store the data for this long? Right, so that's the things that we want to keep into consideration. So data mapping, lovely map. Now, Stephen's going to do a bit more about consent with third parties, aren't you, later? But let's just whiz through what the consents are, because they are interesting. So, consent. Someone has said, yes, please contact me. Someone has signed up for your newsletter. You have consent. Someone has given you a business card. You have consent. Contract. We are in some kind of contract. You have bought something off me. Therefore, I forget the law, but the Sales Act of whatever. We're now in a contractual situation. I have a legal obligation to keep that data. So that might be, this is where contract and legal kind of blend into one and the same. But maybe you're collecting data about child protection. So you have a legal duty to collect that data. You don't have a choice. You have to collect it. Vital interest. This is the one, we'll get back to that in a minute. Public task. So that's the one that the NHS is relying on to get them out of jail free. Legitimate interest. You bought a purple unicorn off me before. Therefore, I could argue you have a legitimate interest in purple unicorns. Or maybe a pink unicorn. Who knows? Unicorns are cool. So these are the ones. Vital interest is the interesting one. I don't know what you think, Stephen, but I think that's just the spy one. I call it performing a public duty or a vital interest allows us to still keep on spying on you all the time. Right, data mapping. This is back to answering some of the questions. In order to protect your data, you need to know what data you have in the first place. So think about these questions. What data do you hold? Is it personal data? Is it employee data? Is it customer data? Where is it stored? And under what conditions is it kept? And we'll get onto that when we get to the practical stuff. Right, now, see, data mapping is really, aren't you glad you're a startup and you don't have to go through this process? And Trish is going to hit me afterwards, I was going to take it out, to be honest. But then I thought, no, I'm going to keep it in. Because you might be sitting there going, this is not relevant to me. I do not have an accounts department. But let's just assume our startup is successful. And we don't want it to sprawl into a great big success and then get a great big massive fine and ruin the startup. So I'm going to whiz through this. But for each of these sections, if you're thinking, well, we use third-party suppliers for that, we'll cover it. But shall we just go through it and see how it works? So just imagine we're a company. These are the sort of things that companies have. So let's think about the accounts department, the payroll department. Everybody needs to be paid. So you've got the staff bank details. Now, the sales department does not need to see the staff banking details. Agreed? You'd be amazed how many bad companies we come into to test for security, and everybody can see everybody else's stuff. This is why GDPR exists, to stop these problems. Salary details. Staff data, phone, email, address, employee. Who else on this list legitimately should be able to see the staff data? That one. Anybody think? HR, yeah, sure. Now, do they need to see necessarily the banking details? No, but you'd be amazed. People just fill out the form. It goes off to HR, it goes off to payroll. Suddenly HR are sitting on top of details that they don't need to see. Theoretically, yes, if they lose it. And it's bad practice to begin with, and then it's a bigger fine if somebody leaves the folder of all the new starts on a train. It's not just all cybersecurity stuff, it's physical paper as well. Right, so what do the accounts department need to ask themselves? This is where it gets more relevant to you. Right, we hold our bank details, but you know Sage, if you've ever been paid, you've probably been paid by Sage. Third party, Sage stores it for us. We've got a digital copy, but we know that Sage has a copy because that's how we press the button and pay everybody. Salary details, we put it on an Excel spreadsheet, but then we probably leave it on someone's desktop that says salary details, and that person is not trained in security and doesn't lock their computer. When we do what we call phishing exercises, we try and hack into companies physically. The one that always works, never failed. Walk onto the car park, drop a malicious USB drive, stick salary details on it. Now, that will get returned to the payroll department, but not before the person who picks it up has opened it up and read what the salary details are, because human beings are just like that. Okay, we've got it on paper, and we've got this on paper. Now, this is not the same for every company, and your organizations will be different, but you get the point. We need to go to this fine level of granularity to start thinking about it. And then suddenly we will find out that we have details and information that we didn't ever consider. Okay, that's a little. Sage is stored in a database. Salary stored digitally on a computer. That is locked in a filing cabinet. Is the filing cabinet locked? You're shaking. We've all been there. This is stored in a filing cabinet. We physically have a copy of it. Okay, so we're getting on to the method. So for all the information that you gather, it has to be transferred in some kind of way. Information has to flow around. Sage, we know it's electronic. Excel, we know it's electronic. Paper, we know it's physical. Paper, we know it's physical. Seems a really tedious exercise at this point, but these are the problems. People have not historically done this, so they haven't thought about it. Now, what's my consent for each of these, storing this data? Okay, I've got consent for bank details. It's also contractual as well. Salary, contractual. Okay, did I get consent to store the phone, email addresses of employees. You could argue that's contractual, but why not just get them to give you the consent? That's the thing that Stephen was talking about when we pass data around different organisations. And Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs legally require me to hold that information for, what is it, 6 years, I think, is the minimum? I think so. Varies from company to company, business sector to business sector. Right, so there we go. There we go. How do we transfer it? We transfer it electronically. Have we asked Sage how secure the stuff is? Well, you have done, because you've gone and looked at the privacy policy. So this is why we did that. Let's go look at the organizations that we use as third-party suppliers, figure out what their security is like. Now, people go, oh, well, can I ask the question? Yes, you can totally now hit up eBay and do what I do, just troll organizations, asking them awkward security questions. Oh, no, don't laugh. My hobby is trolling the ICO. I literally troll the ICO for a hobby. I once phoned up the ICO, I am not making this up, and said to them, do you know those fines that you levy at people, those £400,000 fines? Who gets the money for the fines? Because I just wanted to know where all the money went. Did they just buy themselves golden toilets every time they fine a person? And the nice lady in the ICO phoned me and said, sir, I cannot tell you. And then she lowered her voice and she said, what you can do is if you do a freedom of information request to the Treasury, they'll have to tell you where our money goes to. Think about that. That was the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, telling me to do a freedom of information request to find out where the money for the Information Commissioner's Office ends up in the first place. Wow. I didn't have the balls to do the freedom of information request, to be honest. I'm already on too many lists. So look, accounts here are the data controller. The whole organisation is, but the accountancy department has the responsibility. This is all about responsibility. They've outsourced it to Sage. Sage becomes the data processor. Does that make sense? So you're the data controller when you're sitting with all your email addresses, you're sending it to people. You send it through Gmail for work or whatever. They become the data processor. Now, we'll get onto this later, but under GDPR, the data controller and the data processor are both liable. So if Gmail loses all of your client data, you're both liable, technically. Don't ask me how that's going to work in practice, but these are the considerations. This is the point of this exercise. Goes back through that way. Yep, we definitely need to conduct a data privacy impact assessment, which we will all do later in a second, so it's good. How secure is Sage? Right, have a look at the next exercise. Actually, this is very unprofessional. Let me just check my slides. Yes, the impact assessment comes after the data mapping. Well done, Paul. Don't laugh at me, Stephen. I do know how this works, you know. Right, so you've got this second bit, data processing, right? Literally 2 minutes. What sort of data are you collecting? Do you need to store it? Why do you store it? Where is it stored? How long am I keeping it for? Can I actually legitimately store it for that length of time? You've only really meant to keep it for the amount of time to process it. And do I have a mechanism to remove it? Someone sends me an email and says, I don't like you anymore. I want everything off your systems. Do I have a method, right? So think about your own organization. Literally 2 or 3 minutes. You won't answer all the questions just now, but at least let's get you thinking. Right, off you go.